When you think about the Age of Enlightenment, it's easy to picture it as this all-out assault on religion. But you know, the real story is so much more interesting. It wasn't just an attack, it was more like a crucible. This period of intense heat and pressure that tested, challenged, and ultimately transformed Christianity, shaping the very world we live in today.
And that really brings us to the central question of this whole period. It's a collision of two incredibly powerful worldviews. One is built on divine revelation and ancient tradition, and the other is all about empirical evidence and individual thought. The sparks from that collision, well, they would go on to light up the next 3 centuries.
So, we're talking about a really pivotal century here, stretching roughly from the late 1600s to the late 1700s. And this wasn't just a blip on the radar, it was an entire era of radical intellectual and cultural shifts that challenged pretty much everything, from how kings ruled to whether miracles were even possible.
So, what was the Enlightenment, really? At its heart, it was this powerful movement that championed a totally new way of thinking. This wasn't just about a few new ideas, it was about a whole new method for discovering truth, a method that was going to shake the very foundations of the established order.
Okay, so here are the core pillars of that new way of thinking. First, the human mind, reason, was put on a pedestal, elevated above divine revelation. Then you've got science and observation. People were pointing telescopes at the heavens and challenging age-old interpretations. And this new desire for individual freedom, well, it sought to break the chains of inherited authority, questioning both the king and the church. Every single one of these ideas was on a direct collision course with traditional Christianity.
And believe me, the thinkers of the day did not shy away from that collision. Philosophers like Voltaire and David Hume started applying these rational tools directly to religious beliefs. They began asking really tough questions about miracles, about the Bible's origins, about the role of the church. It was like placing faith itself under a brand new, incredibly powerful microscope.
This contrast here just captures that clash perfectly, doesn't it? On one side, you have a universe guided by God's plan and punctuated by miracles. On the other, a universe governed by predictable, natural laws that you can observe and test. These weren't just different opinions. They were fundamentally different ways of seeing reality itself.
And out of all this intellectual ferment, a new idea started to gain traction: deism. You could almost call it a religious middle ground for the age. It allowed for a creator god, this master watchmaker who designed our intricate universe, but it rejected the idea of miracles, or a god who steps in and meddles in human affairs. For a lot of Enlightenment thinkers, this was a perfectly rational way to have faith.
The Enlightenment didn't just bring new ideas, it brought new tools to the table. For the first time, scholars began analyzing the Bible not just as a holy book, but as a historical document. Scientists like Newton were revealing a cosmos of stunning mathematical precision, and philosophers started arguing that we could build a moral framework based on reason alone. Each new tool just put more and more pressure on traditional doctrines.
So, how did Christianity respond to all this? It's really tempting to think it was just this simple, unified rejection, that they just built a fortress wall and said no. But the reality was so much more complex and, honestly, way more fascinating. The response wasn't a single wall. It was this dynamic, diverse range of adaptations, reforms, and incredibly passionate revivals.
Now, if you look at how these responses break down, something really striking pops out. The largest chunk, at a full 40%, was personal revival. So while plenty of people engaged intellectually with all the new philosophy, an even greater number turned inward. This tells you that Christianity fought back not just with the mind, but with the heart and the soul.
So let's talk about that intellectual front. This is where Christian apologetics really came into its own. Thinkers like William Paley, for example, didn't reject reason, they co-opted it. He famously argued that if you found a watch on the ground, you'd assume there was a watchmaker. Well, he said, look at the complexity of the natural world. That points to a divine designer. This was using the Enlightenment's own logic of evidence and reason to argue for Christianity.
And here we have this beautiful, really sophisticated counterpoint from the mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal. Now, this wasn't a rejection of reason at all. It was an acknowledgement of its limits. Pascal was essentially arguing that faith occupies a space that pure logic can't always reach, appealing to that deep human experience of wonder and awe and need.
For a lot of people, the Enlightenment's focus on cold, detached reason just felt empty. So in response, these massive revival movements swept across Europe and America, and they all emphasized a personal, emotional, and transformative religious experience.
a direct pushback to what they saw as sterile intellectualism.
And this turn inward was led by some seriously powerful new movements. You had Pietism in Europe, the Great Awakenings that just set the American colonies ablaze with religious fervor, but the theme was always the same. Faith wasn't just something to be debated, it was something to be felt. John Wesley's Methodism, in particular, gave people a powerful structure for this kind of personal spiritual renewal.
The changes weren't just spiritual, They were also super practical and structural. The Catholic Church launched reforms to better educate its clergy. Some Protestant groups started opening up new leadership roles for women. The era sparked a whole new wave of global missionary work and this really vibrant exchange of religious ideas across the Atlantic. Christianity was adapting, both on the inside and in how it faced the world.
Okay, so what was the final result of this century-long conversation between faith and reason? It wasn't a knockout victory for either side. Instead, their intense interaction literally forged the framework for the modern Western world. We are, in so many ways, the direct heirs of this crucible.
At the end of the day, the Enlightenment was not the end of Christianity. Not even close. It was a profound transformation. It forced the faith to redefine itself, to find new language, and to carve out a whole new role for itself in a rapidly changing world.
And the legacy of this era is literally all around us. Concepts we take for granted now, like religious toleration and the separation of church and state, these were radical ideas back then. But by challenging the absolute authority of a single church, the Enlightenment blew the doors open for societies to accept religious diversity and to completely rethink the relationship between faith and government. This focus on individual conscience laid the very groundwork for our modern idea of religious freedom.
So why does all this matter? Because the debates that were hammered out in the 18th century are still the debates we're having today. The relationship between science and faith, the role of religion in government, the nature of individual belief. This era basically drew the blueprints for all of it.
And so we're left with this question. The Enlightenment as a historical period might be over, but its central tension, that incredible, dynamic interplay between faith and reason, is very much alive. The conversation continues, not in the salons of 18th century Paris, but in our schools, our governments, and in our own minds. The question is, where do we take it from here?